Trinity Holmes, great-granddaughter of Balthazar Holmes, librarian turned paranormal investigator. And this is where I keep the cases that don't fit anywhere else. Welcome to Trinity Holmes, P.I., a podcast of haunted histories, vanished names, and the silences that grow between the rows. Last week we opened the case of the Ashwood orphans. Children uncounted, still calling out through soot and time. This week we traveled deeper, south, into a different kind of silence. There's a field in Louisiana where the cane grows too sweet, too tall, where the harvest leaves behind more than roots and stubble, where the wind doesn't just whisper, it sings. This is not a ghost story. This is a wound, and if you walk far enough into the stalks, it might remember your name. Today's case, the Hollow Harvest. Supper on the table. There's something about sugarcane fields at dawn. The mist rises thick and low, curling like breath across the rows. The stalks stand tall and silent, green blades slick with dew, catching the first pale light of morning. And if you're still, if you let yourself listen, you might swear they whisper, not in words exactly, just the suggestion of something not quite natural moving beneath the hush. In Iberville Parish, in the fall of 1897, the Beauregard family sat down for supper. 6 of them lived in the weathered white house nestled deep in the fields. Jules and Claudine Beauregard, their 3 children, and old Aunt Muriel, who hadn't spoken since the war, but was said to hum hymns in her sleep. That evening, the table was set with pewter plates and hand-stitched napkins. A roast chicken browned in its pan. Biscuits lay waiting under a checked cloth. The gravy, thick and dark with drippings, was poured, still steaming, into the family's best ceramic bowl. Neighbors would later remember the smell, rich, spiced, as if the fields themselves had held their breath for it. By morning, the Beauregards were gone. Not murdered, not robbed, not taken away in some storm or field. The house stood undisturbed, front door unlocked, chairs neatly tucked under the table. The roast had cooled. The gravy had formed a skin. A simple fork lay on the floor beneath Jules' place, as though it had simply slipped from his hand. Nothing else was out of place. The children's shoes were lined up by the door. Aunt Morel's shawl still hung on the peg. No signs of a struggle, no blood, no footprints in the damp red dirt outside, just an unfinished supper, a house full of silence, and fields that felt watchful. A search party scoured the area for 3 days. Dogs refused to go near the case. One old hound laid down and howled until he lost his voice. Men muttered about ghosts, but the sheriff blamed swamp fever or bandits and closed the file before the week was out. But the locals kept talking. Some said the Beauregards had fallen afoul of a curse. Others whispered of debts, old ancestral ones owed to the land itself. A few remembered stories from their grandmothers, that there were places in Louisiana where the ground didn't just take people, it claimed them. And that year, something changed in the harvest. One row of cane, just one, stood untouched, half cut, as if someone had started and stopped mid-swing. Workers refused to finish it. Those stalks grew tall and wild, flowering weeks past the season. No one ever entered that row again. The path around it is still worn, smooth, from 100 harvests that avoided it. In the decades that followed, the story passed like a shadow down family lines. The house eventually fell into ruin. The fields changed hands, changed names. But every now and then, every time the cane turned golden sweet, someone vanished. Not every year, not predictably, but regularly enough to be remembered. always alone, always in the field, always with supper waiting somewhere. In 1923, a young man named Baptiste vanished mid-harvest. His scythe dropped like a toy in the half-cut row. In 1971, an old woman walked into the cane with her rosary beads and never walked out. In 2008, a field tech live-streamed himself mocking the curse. The video froze. His laughter cut off. They found his phone at the field's edge, screen cracked and playing static. And last year, it happened again. The pattern is never loud, never brash, just the soft, steady beat of something hungry that never quite stopped, something that waits, something that remembers. Because when the wind moves just right, the stalks rustle like they're whispering, and if you listen closely, you might hear your own name. This is the story of the Beauregards and all who came after, of a field that eats, of Harvest Hollow, and the rows that are never finished. Echoes in the stalks. Time passed, as it always does in places where the land grows heavy with memory. The Beauregard homestead decayed plank by plank, until nothing but stone steps and a chimney remained. The fields, however, thrived. Season after season, cane was planted, tended, and cut, its roots fed by more than just soil. For a while, there was quiet. No more talk of disappearances, no signs, no stories loud enough to catch on, until 1923. That year, Baptiste Gadot was 17, a lean, laughing boy who knew the fields like the back of his hand. He was the kind of worker the older men respected, fast with the blade, steady with the mules, always whistling some half-remembered tune. On the third week of harvest, Baptiste took a row alone just after lunch. His cousin Marcel saw him go in. He never saw him come out. They found his scythe, sunk, blade first into the dirt. His boots were a few yards away, still laced up. No blood, no sign of a struggle, just an unfinished row of cane, split down the middle like a wound someone lost the courage to stitch shut. The men refused to finish it, said the air felt wrong there, too still, like something was holding its breath. They left that row standing, and the next year they planted around it. Baptiste was never found. Over the decades that followed, the pattern began to emerge. In 1946, Thomas Rouleau disappeared mid-harvest, his gloves still damp with sweat, left folded atop a stalk. In 1958, Lucille Ballard vanished at the edge of a half-cut row, her sickle lying half-buried in the mud. 2022. 6 vanishings, each one in the fall, each one in the fields, each one leaving a row of cane untouched, half done, as if the worker had been plucked from the world mid-motion. The stories weren't always the same, but the shape of them was. Always one person, never two, never a group. Always alone, always autumn, always the cane. And always, just always, something left behind, a hat, a blade, a set of rosary beads strung through the stalks like a warning. The local papers reported them as tragedies. Of course they did. Headlines called them disappearances, accidents, runaways. Field hand missing without a trace. Harvest time haunting. Woman vanishes near ruined homestead. Police records were sparse, almost offensively so. A page or two. No leads, no follow-ups, no bodies. Just blank spaces where answers should have been. But the locals, especially the older ones, began to notice. They started talking in lowered voices. They started marking the calendar, not by saints' days or football season, but by when the cane turned gold. Some families stopped letting their children work harvest at all. Others began leaving offerings again. Salt, coins, rum. at the edges of the rows. Superstition, some said. Tradition, others claimed. But behind both lay the same truth. The land had a memory, and it was getting hungry again. The rows where the disappearances happened became known by whispers. The hollow rows. Men walked around them in wide arcs. The harvest crews began keeping quiet logs of where to avoid, never admitting the pattern out loud, but never daring to challenge it either. Those who did found their sickles dulled faster, their fingers blistered more easily, their nights interrupted by uneasy dreams of rustling leaves and low voices, singing something too old to translate. Even the machinery refused. A tractor stalled out in one of those rows in 1994. Wouldn't start again until it was pulled 20 feet backward. The driver quit 2 days later and moved north. Said he could hear someone tap it on the glass of his bedroom window. Years later, miles away, there was no official acknowledgement of a pattern, of course. No sheriff willing to say what the townspeople already knew. But the map of silence grew, row by row, until even the new generation of field hands knew which lines not to cross. It would be easy, so easy, to call all this coincidence, to write it off as a legend, old swamp tales wrapped in the fog of time. And many do. They laugh, they dismiss. They cut the cane and ignore the way the wind sometimes dies all at once, or the way the birds won't fly over certain patches. But a pattern doesn't need permission to be real. It just needs time and roots. Because while one tragedy might fade, and two might feel like a chance, 6, 7, a century of disappearances that all follow the same rhythm, that's no coincidence. That's a ritual. And rituals, well, rituals feed something that always knows when it's harvest time. Curses of the cane. Sugarcane is beautiful in the wrong kind of way. Tall, sweet, shimmering in the light, but underneath it hides razors, leaves sharp enough to slice skin, and stems that never forget how they were planted. Because here in Louisiana, cane didn't just grow, it was forced. It came with chains. It came with blood. In the early 1700s, French colonialists brought sugarcane to the region, and it thrived in the swampy heat. By the 1800s, whole parishes were carved up into plantations, worked by the hands of enslaved men, women, and children whose sweat soaked the fields long before irrigation ever did. The work was brutal, backbreaking. The blades were dull. The overseers were not. Harvest season wasn't just hot, it was dangerous. A wrong cut could mean infection. A wrong word could mean the whip. And still, the fields demanded more. Always more. Cane fed empires, built fortunes. Sugar barons lined their pockets with molasses-stained money, while the people who worked the fields bled into them. And when emancipation came, things didn't change as much as shift. The chains became contracts. The plantations were renamed farms. But the labor stayed hard. The hours stayed long, and the cane still drank deeply from the people who tended it. Land was stolen from Creole families through legal loopholes and threats. Freedmen were trapped in cycles of debt, and year after year, generation after generation, the harvest never stopped coming. So maybe it's not so strange to think that the land might remember. Maybe it's not just superstition when people say the cane grows too fast, too tall, in places where something was lost. Because in southern Louisiana, there's an old belief passed down through back porches and supper tables. It doesn't appear in textbooks or news reports, but ask the right elder in the right parish, and they'll tell you in a low voice. Le champ qui mange, the field that eats. It doesn't always mean something sinister. Sometimes it's just a warning. Other times a curse. But it's always a reminder that the land is alive, that it sees, that it takes. In some stories, the field eats what it's owed. Blood for blood, pain for pain. In others, it's punishment for arrogance, for forgetting, for harvesting without honoring what came before. I spoke to Celestine Dugas, age 84, whose grandfather worked the cane rows around Iberville Parish in the 1920s. She told me, he used to say the cane had a mouth, a deep one. It didn't show teeth, but it swallowed just the same. I asked her if she meant that figuratively. She looked me dead in the eye and said, "You think people don't vanish for a reason?" She wasn't the only one. I heard echoes of the same story in a dozen different interviews, always whispered, always told with the weight of generations behind it. Grandparents who warned their children to sing when they entered the field. Great aunts who said not to speak ill of the cane. Uncles who poured whiskey at the edge of the rows before harvest. Those were superstitious people, some might say. But maybe superstition is just memory that hasn't been erased yet. And those memories stretch deep into the dirt here. There's a long-standing practice in some families, Creole, Cajun, and even newer arrivals, of leaving harvest offerings at the start of the season, a coin pressed into the soil, a pour of rum on the edge of the field, a heel of bread tucked beneath a rock. Not for good luck, not for saints or spirits, for the land, for whatever waits beneath. Some say it's a custom inherited from African spiritual traditions, mingled with French folk rites and Catholic symbols, an alchemy of survival in a place that didn't want you to survive. Others say it was something older, something the land taught them directly. I met a man named Jules Arsenault, whose father disappeared in 1971 while clearing a row outside of White Castle. Jules was just 12 then, but he remembers his mother going to the field the next day with a mason jar of sweet tea and a rosary. She poured it out slow, he said, like it was for somebody watching. Then she left the beads on a cane stalk and told me not to speak his name until the season passed. I asked him if he thought it helped. He shrugged. We never lost anyone else. There's a story that crops up again and again, told in different ways, but always with the same shape. If you don't pay the field will take what it's owed. Some believe that what it takes is bloodline-based, that descendants of those who profited most from the cane are the most likely to vanish. Others believe it's about presence, who mocks, who disrespects, who forgets, who dares to enter without reverence. And then there are those who say it's entirely random, that the land doesn't care about justice or memory, that it only cares about hunger. But even they leave their offerings, because whether you believe in curses or not, there's a quiet rule down here in Harvest Country. You don't take from the land without giving something back, even if it's just a whisper, a coin, a crumb. The land that hungers. If you want to understand Harvest Hollow, you don't start with the science. You start with the people. The ones who've lived the cane their whole lives. The ones who walk the rows with second sight and sleep with salt tucked under their pillows. I began by sitting down with the descendants of those who worked these fields. Not professors, not politicians, just people who'd grown up listening. And the stories they told, they weren't rehearsed. They weren't eager. They were hesitant, like secrets passed through a screen door at dusk. Miss Adeline Robichaud was 91, sharp as a needle and slow to trust. We met on her porch, just outside Plaquemine. She wore a faded dress the color of rust and watched me with the wary patience of someone who's buried more truth than she's spoken. My daddy worked these fields, she told me. Said some rows grow mean. I asked her what that meant. He said you could feel it. Some rows want you in 'em. Others don't. The ones that don't, they hum. She didn't mean it poetically. She meant literally. She described hearing a low rhythmic pulse when walking certain lines of cane. Not wind, not insects, something deeper, beneath the soil, like a sound meant for someone else, but loud enough to graze your bones. Others backed her up. A former cane driver named Leron Lejeune said the livestock always knew. Mules refused to plow some rows, he told me. They'd stop dead, eyes rolling, like they saw something behind the stalks we couldn't. His uncle had been thrown from a plow cart in 1994. No explanation, no injury, just a pale, wide-eyed man who refused to ever enter the fields again. Died in a trailer a few towns over. Wouldn't even eat sugar after that. Several of the elders I interviewed mentioned dreams, especially in the days leading up to a disappearance. One woman spoke of fire without smoke. Another dreamed of voices calling her name in French Creole, though she herself had never spoken the language. One dream kept reoccurring across generations, rows of cane parting like a curtain, revealing a hollow center, a space that should not be there, a space that felt watched. I expected ghost stories. I expected folklore. What I didn't expect was science. Geologists working for the state had surveyed parts of these fields a few years ago, looking for old French drainage canals or native mounds. What they found instead were sinkholes, tiny ones, narrow as a barrel but deep. The strange thing, they occurred in a new location every few years, but always in just one row, always in the wrong row. The locals had already mapped them without needing instruments. They just called them the hollow rows. The data showed something else, too. The soil in those spots ran colder, and not just seasonally, year-round, by 2 to 3 degrees, enough to raise questions, but not enough to trigger investigation. Botanists took samples and found something even stranger. The cane growing in those rows, the unfinished ones, the cursed ones, grew back faster, healed like skin. Where other rows took a full year to return after harvest, these sprouted thick and tall in a matter of months, resistant to blight, resistant to drought, too resilient, as if the land itself were closing a wound. One botanist off the record called it a biological anomaly, or a cover-up by nature. I asked what that meant. Something unnatural thrives there, but the land hides it, like scar tissue. All of this would be unsettling on its own, but paired with the whispers, it becomes something else entirely. The whispering phenomenon, as it's come to be known among amateur paranormal circles, is now well documented, at least anecdotally. Every known disappearance from Harvest Hollow has been preceded by someone hearing voices in the cane. Not conversations, not screams, just tones. Low, layered, like several people humming different notes at once, slightly out of sync. No clear words, no language, just the suggestion of meaning. Field hands describe it as a pressure in the ears and sensation of not being alone, a vibration in the chest. Some say it feels like being watched. Others say it feels like being invited. One man told me, "It's not a sound you hear, it's a sound you remember." I brought audio engineers into the area. We set up parabolic mics across different rows over the course of 3 nights. First night, nothing. The second night, static. The third night, we got something. It wasn't loud, barely audible over the insects, but in one specific row, where Lucille Bellard disappeared in 1958, we captured a thread of harmonic tones, a series of rising and falling notes. Impossible to identify. No birds, no wind, just resonance. The engineer ran it through a spectrum analyzer and found overlapping waveforms in conflicting frequencies, something that shouldn't be there. Human ears couldn't have picked out the differences, but machines could. One waveform matched the average range of a female voice. Another dipped into sub-bass tones, usually found in mechanical environments. Together, they created a dissonance that left one of our interns nauseous for hours. He said it felt like his thoughts weren't his anymore. Some theorize it's a psychogenic trigger, a sound so perfectly unnatural it disorients the brain, like infrasound, but smarter, older. Others, they think the field is speaking, not to us, to something beneath. Paranormal researchers have pointed to similar phenomenon near places of ritual sacrifice, ley lines, mass graves, anywhere the land has absorbed too much death. But what's unique about Harvest Hollow is its consistency. This isn't a one-time haunting. It's a pattern, a schedule, a hunger that wakes up every few years, calls out in song, and waits for someone to answer. And someone always does. The voices in the cane don't chase you. They invite you in. All you have to do is step inside. Vanishing point. Case studies. If you study the pattern long enough, the disappearances begin to blur together. Names become numbers. Rows become statistics. It's tempting to keep your distance. Call them accidents, anomalies, coincidences. But the truth has teeth, and it lives in the details. Each case tells a story, or rather, each case starts a story. The ending is always the same, absence. But what leads to it, what surrounds it, is worth listening to. Case 1. Thomas Rouleau, 1946. The Rouleau family had been working cane since before the war. Thomas, the youngest of 7, was 19 when he disappeared. His brothers were off fighting overseas. His father had died from yellow fever years prior. That left Thomas and his sister Marie to manage the last of the family's leased rows near Bayou Gula. Marie remembers it was a humid day, October 10th, 1946. No breeze, the kind of heat that makes the air feel thick enough to chew. Thomas had gone out early to cut the back rows, the one closest to the old Beauregard Foundation. Marie stayed behind to sort tools and mend socks. She brought him lunch around noon, but he wasn't there. What she did find were his boots, neatly placed side by side in the middle of the row. A few feet away, his blade was stuck into the dirt, as if he'd paused mid-swing and vanished into the heat. No blood, no footprints, no signs of a struggle. Marie never saw her brother again, but she remembers what he said the night before. "He told me the cane was talking," she said in her interview. "Said he kept hearing voices between the rows. I told him it was just wind, just bugs. But he looked at me with this hollow sort of fear. Said it was humming his name." Marie never moved. She lived out her days in the same shotgun house, windows shuttered year-round. On her table was a photo of Thomas, one of the only ones ever taken. In it, he's barefoot, smiling, standing in front of the cane. Case 2. Ella Mae Dugas, 1971. Ella Mae was 83 years old when she vanished. Widowed twice, mother of 5. Beloved Sunday school teacher, known throughout White Castle as Miss Ella. No one expected her to still be working the fields at her age, but she insisted on tending a small garden row behind her church, where an old patch of cane had been left to grow wild. She'd walked out there in the afternoons with her straw hat and her rosary, humming hymns under her breath. Some folks said she spoke to the stalks, called them cher like they were old friends. Father Baptiste, the local priest, spoke to her 2 days before she disappeared. She told me, he recalled, the harvest wants me. He laughed at the time, thought it was just her poetic way of saying she felt tired, thought maybe she meant God was calling her home. But now he isn't so sure. She was last seen October 22nd, 1971. A neighbor saw her walking out into the garden, trailing her rosary behind her like a ribbon. She never came back. The only thing found was that same rosary, looped carefully around one of the cane stalks, as though hung with reverence. What's strange is how her absence echoed. That year, no one in the parish touched the cane. It stood tall and uncut well into December. People said it whispered louder after she left, that her hymn lingered at the edge of hearing, and one woman swore her baby, who'd just begun to babble, repeated the name Ella in her crib for days afterward. Case 3. Isaiah Pierre. Isaiah Pierre was the outlier, young, tech-savvy, a transplant from Atlanta who moved to Baton Rouge for college and fell in love with rural photography. He discovered Harvest Hollow online, read the ghost stories, the forum posts, the conspiracies, thought it would make great content. In early October of 2008, Isaiah began a TikTok series called Haunting the Hollow. It started off funny, clips of him dancing in front of cane rows, joking about the sugarcane boogeyman. He staged mock exorcisms, used filters to add fake ghosts in the distance. His view count spiked fast. Then, in one video, he took it too far. He filmed himself walking barefoot into a field near the Beauregard ruins. The caption read, "Let's see if the Hollow's hungry tonight." He's laughing, smirking, saying, "Come on, whisper to me, I'm listening." Halfway through the clip, he stops, head tilted, listening. And then he smiles, but not like before, not amused, not performative. It's the smile of someone who's just understood something. The video cuts abruptly. Static, then black. That was the last post on his account. Authorities found his phone 2 days later in a muddy ditch beside the road. Screen cracked, battery still at 40%. The footage was still intact, but nothing else was found. His backpack, his shoes, his car keys, all gone. The field he entered was checked with cadaver dogs, thermal drones, even helicopters, no trace. But those who watched the video claimed to hear something. If you turn up the volume, just past the halfway mark, you can hear a low hum behind Isaiah's words. Layered, discordant, almost like voices trying to harmonize, but never quite aligning. And when he stops walking, just before the cut, his lips are moving, but he's not saying anything. Not to us. Common threads. 3 disappearances, 60 years apart. No blood, no bodies, no signs of struggle, but certain things repeat. Each victim was alone. Each was found, or not found, in the middle of a row. Each left something behind. A knife, a rosary, a phone. And each event was preceded by some form of contact. A sound, a whisper of message that no one else could hear. They weren't all related. They weren't even all from the same town. But they walked into the same kind of silence. A silence with memory. A silence with hunger. And they were never seen again. It's easy to say they were taken, but that word suggests force, suggests resistance. None of these stories feel like that. They feel like invitation, a subtle summoning, a call from something buried deep in the roots of this place, older than the fields, older than the Beauregards, older than language itself. Something that waits patiently each year for the right time, the right person, the right opening. And when it finds one, it leaves a row half cut, a tool in the dirt, and silence. Into the harvest. Ask 10 people where Harvest Hollow is, and you'll get 10 different answers. Some will point to a particular bend in the Rose near Bayou Maragon. Others claim it's not tied to any location at all, just a pattern that moves. A migratory hunger, like a predator with a seasonal route. And a few will tell you that Harvest Hollow isn't a place. It's a wound. That's the word most often used by the older families and the folk sensitives who spent their lives listening to the land. Not a hole, not a ghost, a wound in the world, one that never healed, one that opens just wide enough every few years to swallow something whole. One Creole elder told me, "It ain't a where, it's a when." It pulls people in, not violently, not even cruelly, just naturally. Like a breath drawn through lungs, like a tide pulling toward deep water. A place of absence, they say, not of death, necessarily, but of removal, a thinning, a soft unraveling of self. Some call it a spiritual sinkhole. Some call it the light eater. Those more attuned to energy, sensitives, psychics, empaths, describe it not in terms of what it shows, but what it takes. When you stand near one of the bad rows, they say, it feels like your thoughts slow down, like your body isn't anchored the way it should be. You don't feel scared, said one sensitive. You feel willing. She paused, then added, that's the part that haunts me. Paranormal investigations. The legend of the Hollow eventually made its way beyond the parish. By the 1980s, amateur paranormal investigators began poking around, armed with cassette recorders and a little too much confidence. The first serious investigation took place in 1987. A group calling themselves the Gulf Phenomena Society spent 3 nights camped out in cane fields near the old Beauregard site. Night 1, uneventful. Night 2, their EMF detector spiked briefly. They chalked it up to faulty equipment. Night 3, they got something. An EVP recorded around 2:30 a.m. caught what sounded like chanting, low rhythmic syllables in a language the team couldn't identify. It was French Creole, spoke slowly in fragments. Laissez-lui entrer, let him enter. Offrez-lui ton nom, offer him your name. Il revient, he returns. The group left shaken. One of them, a 22-year-old named Caleb Duplantier, refused to speak publicly about what happened. Privately, he claimed that on the 3rd night, he saw someone in the field, someone who looked like him. Not identical, not a twin, just close enough to know it wasn't right. He left the group and never returned to paranormal work. The next major investigation didn't happen until 2013, this time by a team with more modern gear. Scanners, night vision drones, thermal mics. They approached it as skeptics, hoping to debunk the legends and produce a short YouTube series. What they got was something else entirely. Their lead investigator, Simone Calderon, wandered off during a night scan and didn't respond to radio calls for 4 hours. When they found her, she was standing in the middle of a bare clearing surrounded by cane, barefoot, eyes dilated, humming something no one recognized. She couldn't say where she'd been. She just kept repeating one phrase over and over. Il m'a vu. He saw me. It took weeks before she would speak publicly again. When she finally did, she said she remembered walking through a spiral of lightless stalks, where the wind moved in circles and the ground breathed like lungs. She has left the paranormal field entirely. Drone footage and mapping. In 2020, a private surveyor working on behalf of an agricultural tech firm conducted a drone pass over the same region. They weren't looking for ghosts. They were tracking moisture levels, trying to optimize fertilizer placement. What they found was something else. The aerial scans showed a symmetrical pattern of field disturbances, too regular to be natural. Rows of cane that should have been identical in length were subtly warped, bowing inward, like pulled toward a central axis. In several locations, drones picked up radial spirals in the crop, a growth pattern inconsistent with the wind or irrigation. No insects, no disease, just deviation. LIDAR mapping, taken later that month, revealed what appeared to be voids beneath the surface. Cavities, some natural, perhaps. But the shapes were off, not random enough. Not in this part of Louisiana, where the water table is shallow and the soil dense. One underground space was roughly circular, 12 meters across, positioned directly beneath one of the unfinished rows from the 2008 disappearance. It's not listed on geological surveys. It has no name, but when you overlay the disappearance map with the LIDAR scans, a pattern emerges. Each victim vanished above a void, and the roads that were left unfinished, when viewed from above, they align in the shape of a spiral. Not a perfect Fibonacci, but close. Close enough to raise eyebrows, close enough to raise questions. Why would a spiral form from events decades apart? Who or what is at the center? And if the land is a wound, what happens if it opens wider? The hollow isn't just a story. It isn't just a legend whispered by the old and the frightened. It's mapped into the land, drawn in rows of vanished footsteps, sung in voices caught on tape, charted by machines that know nothing of folklore, but can still recognize something unnatural when they see it. The question isn't whether the hollow is real. It's whether it's finished feeding. The return of the song. There's a rule, unspoken but understood by anyone who's studied the strange for long enough. Don't go alone, especially not to the place where it all began, especially not when the air is thick with a century's worth of unfinished questions. But some stories won't let you stay behind the camera. Some stories, like Harvest Hollow, pull you in. So I went back to the fields, to the ruins of the Beauregard house, where the family vanished without a trace over a century ago. The chimney still stands, half swallowed by vines. The brick steps remain, though the wood is long rotted. If you step carefully, you can still find the outline of the dining room floor, just patches of brick and moss, but enough to see where supper was once served and never eaten. I brought everything I had: parabolic microphones, FLIR thermal imaging, 2 night vision drones, EMF detector, motion-triggered trail cams, a digital recorder synced to both my watch and heart rate, and a copy of the Beauregard family's old prayer hymnal, just in case. The sun was high when I started walking the rows. I moved slowly, careful not to step too far off the old path. I'd marked the sites of the past disappearances using a printed map, stitched together from eyewitness testimony, police records, and drone coordinates. Every site, every row fell into line. This spiral pattern wasn't just theory, it was real. I was standing in it. Phenomena captured. The first sign came just after 2:12 p.m. The parabolic mic, angled toward a southern row near the site of the 1946 disappearance, began picking up faint tonal shifts, barely audible, like distant humming, not mechanical, not wind, not random. I stopped walking, held my breath, adjusted the gain. The tones weren't static. They rose and fell, sometimes in thirds, sometimes in fifths, intervals you'd find in music, not speech, not natural sound, but melody. And it was slow, measured, almost liturgical. FLIR imaging showed another anomaly, and every other row, the thermal pattern was consistent, sun-warmed, the occasional cool patch near the base of the cane. But at 1428, a series of cold spots appeared in perfect 8-foot intervals, stretching across one of the older rows like footprints. No wind, no birds, no visible movement. Just these impossibly even pulses of cold, each one lasting 6 to 10 seconds before vanishing. Still photos taken at those coordinates revealed the worst part. Not immediately, but later, during review. In 4 separate frames, captured in sequence, the cane appears empty. And then in the 5th frame, there's a figure. Mid-stalk, grainy, unclear but unmistakable. Tall, pale, no eyes, just watching. It only appears in 1 frame, then gone. Nothing caught on motion sensors. No thermal signature, but the camera saw it, or something pretending to be seen. The encounter. I didn't plan to hum. Let's get that straight. I was standing in what would have been the Beauregard dining room, just moss and silence now. The air had gone still, not quiet, still, like something had paused the world. I had the hymnal in my backpack. I'd scanned the pages earlier and translated what I could. One piece stood out, an old French Catholic hymn rarely used anymore, a morning song sung in minor key, called La Prière de la Moisson Perdue, the prayer of the lost harvest. I didn't know why I started humming it. Maybe to break the silence. Maybe to test a theory. Maybe I was curious what would answer. It came out of me slow, barely a breath of sound, just the first few bars. And then the wind stopped. Not died down, stopped. Like someone had shut the door on the weather. The cane rustled. Not a breeze, not a gust, a deliberate sound, like hands brushing past rocks, like something moving in a circle around me. Then I heard it. Not screaming, not even whispering. Singing. Layered voices, dozens, hundreds, male, female, childlike, ageless, singing with me, singing that hymn in harmony, out of harmony, not echoing, mirroring, like the field itself had learned the song long ago and was just waiting for someone to start it again. I stood frozen. The EMF detector spiked, beeped, then shorted out completely. The sound lasted exactly 12 seconds. Then silence and stillness and nothing else. Psychological creep. I left the field at 3:03 p.m. Nothing followed me. Nothing touched me. No cold breath on the back of the neck. No shadows in the corners of the frame. But the story didn't end there. That night, in the motel outside of St. Gabriel, I lay in bed with the lights on, reviewing footage, watching the figure in the frame, listening to the layered tones. And then I heard it again. The hum. Faint. In the air conditioner, in the bathroom fan, even in the buzz of my phone charging on the nightstand. That same song, just under the surface. I unplugged everything, turned off every device, put on headphones. Still there. It wasn't loud. It wasn't constant. It was just there. Every so often, it would rise like steam from silence, like it was part of the room, like the world had absorbed it and now played it back. At first, I chalked it up to stress, to the lingering impression of EVP tones stuck in my ears, until the morning after, when I played back my voicemail, A message I'd left for myself as a reminder. Time stamped at 3:07 a.m. My voice is flat, distant, like I'm half asleep, and I'm humming the hymn. Perfect pitch, perfect tempo. This isn't just an echo, it's a call and response. The hollow heard me, and it answered. What the cane remembers. We think of the land as something fixed, unmoving, indifferent, a backdrop. But here in southern Louisiana, the land listens, it watches, it remembers. It remembers the weight of sugarcane blades swung by trembling hands. It remembers blood in the roots, sweat in the furrows, the silence after a prayer goes unanswered. It remembers the Beauregards who vanished mid-supper. It remembers Baptiste, Thomas, Elamé, Isaiah, and all the names we never learned. All the ones who slipped between the rows and were never seen again. Some say it's just superstition, stories grown wild like the cane itself. Others say it's a curse, born from cruelty and grief, fed over generations, a consequence long overdue. But some stories feel older than human sorrow. Some hungers feel older than guilt. And maybe that's what Harvest Hollow really is. Not a ghost, not a haunting, but a presence. Elemental, unseen, patient. A wound in the world that we keep pretending isn't there. We interviewed folklorists, scientists, priests, psychics. We sifted through soil samples and court records and police files with half the pages missing. And still, the answer remains just out of reach. Is it a curse? A spirit? Is it some geological anomaly? A pocket of infrasound that fractures thought and time? Or is it just us? The past refusing to stay buried. Grief with teeth. What if it's memory, embedded so deeply into the soil that it grows roots of its own? What if the field doesn't hate us? What if it's just hungry, not for vengeance, but for recognition? I left the field with one thing, a single stalk of sugarcane tied with red twine. The tradition goes back generations, an offering or a warning, maybe both. I didn't bring it home. I didn't press it into a scrapbook or hang it on a wall. I took it to the edge of a river and let it go. Watched it drift. Because the truth is, you can't take anything from Harvest Hollow. Not really. The moment you try to hold on to it, it holds on to you right back. The land keeps its own ledger, and it always balances the harvest. There's a clip, a piece of found footage from a 1978 agricultural reel, never aired publicly. Grainy, poorly lit. A boy, maybe 12, cuts cane with a worn blade. He's humming, not loudly, but steadily, the same tune, the same hymn. La prière de la moisson perdue. He turns just for a second toward the camera, smiles, and freezes. The frame distorts. The tape warps. A flicker of static. Then beneath the hum, something else. A whisper. Tu es la prochaine. You are next. They called it Harvest Hollow, a place where the rows never finish, where something ancient waits in the roots, hungry for memory, for reckoning, or simply for someone to listen. The records won't show you what happened, but the land remembers. The cane remembers. And maybe now you will too. You've been listening to Trinity Holmes, Paranormal Investigator. We investigate a new case every week, unburied truths, vanishing points, and the strange rhythms that haunt our histories. If you heard something in the wind tonight, a hymn, a hum, or your own name, subscribe, because the next file is already rustling in the dark.